Yeah.
Welcome everybody to this presentation. Appreciate you taking the time, and hopefully what I can help you do today is learn how to see the future a little bit better, particularly when it comes to our monetary system, which is very, very important. Well, whenever we talk about anything that's related to potentially an investment, it's good to provide a disclaimer. So let me get this out of the way right now. This presentation is designed to provide general information regarding tonight's subject matter. However, laws and practices vary from state to state, country to country, and are subject to change. Because each factual situation is different, specific advice should be tailored to your particular circumstances. For this reason, you are advised to consult with your own advisors regarding your individual specific situation. For this reason, I specifically disclaim any liability resulting from the use or application of the information provided in this presentation. The information is not intended to serve as legal or investment advice related to individual situations. All right, so let's get started. Well, for me, this all began in 2008. As a Rich Dad coach, I had the opportunity to head down to Arizona for a number of the Rich Dad events to help out, and one of them was actually titled How to Predict the Future. And it was during this event and a couple of other ones that I started to learn more and more about our money and banking systems, and was absolutely shocked by what I learned, and it quite literally changed my life. And one of the things is that it did was it helped me understand the banking and monetary system, and really what that means to each one of us. Now, this information today, I like to essentially say we're just talking about the tip of the iceberg. It's not intended to give you a full understanding of this topic, but to help you understand and hopefully motivate you to learn more about it. So we're just talking about the tip of the iceberg. Now, one of the things that happened to me, this is just so funny, is, all during this learning about this information, it was actually quite hard to understand in the beginning. And I remember Robert Kiyosaki was getting kind of frustrated, and at one point he said, if you don't know who the patsy is in the game after about 30 minutes, then you're the patsy. And really what that means is, for me, I'm not a poker player, and I know better than to try and get into a game like that, so I choose not to participate. But the problem is, when it comes to money and banking, we're all participants in that game, whether we want to be or not. And if you don't understand it, quite frankly, and just bluntly, you are the patsy in that game. So what do we mean? Well, one of the things that we know about our monetary systems now is we are all in what we call fiat currencies. What's a fiat currency? No, it's not the car, the fiat car. A fiat currency is a currency that is not backed by anything of real tangible value. And for monetary systems for thousands and thousands of years, that's been gold. And now there isn't a country in the world that I know of that is not a fiat currency. So all currencies are fiat currencies. So what does that mean to us? Well, what that means is we have central banking systems in different countries around the world. Ours is called the Federal Reserve. And by the way, the Federal Reserve is neither federal or a reserve. Well, what do we mean? It's about as federal as FedEx. Okay, it is not a government agency or institution. It's a private banking cartel that is owned by shareholders, and quite frankly, we don't know who the shareholders are anymore. When it was first formed, it was the larger banks in the U.S. were the shareholders of the Federal Reserve. Now we don't know exactly who it is, and it's a very closely guarded secret. Okay. Well, what does the Federal Reserve do? It is actually in charge of our money system. Scary thought. And one of the designs of the Federal Reserve, from my point of view, is that they are able to, for the banking system, they are able to privatize profits and socialize losses, meaning they get to keep all the money they make, but if they ever have losses, they get to socialize those through programs like, recently, I guess 2008, 2009 is recently, the TARP program, essentially the bailout of the banks. And so there is evidence that you and I can see from recent history that this is really true. So this makes it a little bit more challenging for each one of us. So this fiat currency, privatized profits, socialized losses, what does that look like? Well, in real life, here, let me show this to you, and let's see if we can get this so you can see it. This is a gold coin, right? The problem is it's gold foil and it's made of chocolate. So if I were to hand this to you and try and transact some business, it wouldn't take you very long before you would say, wait a minute, that's not money. How about this one? So this one is a $10 bill. The problem is right up here, it says play money. It's actually not very big. So it wouldn't take you long to figure out, wait a minute, this isn't money. But let's get into some other examples. I've got one here. This one of my favorites. This is a Zimbabwe note, a $1 Zimbabwe note. And I don't think, if I get this close enough to the screen, this was printed in 2007, okay? A $1 Zimbabwe note. Well, what happened was there was wars to finance, and there was a lot of money being spent by the government. And a year later, they were printing $10 trillion Zimbabwe notes. That's a lot of zeros, by the way. $10 trillion Zimbabwe notes. And if you were to look at the date this one was printed, 2008, 1 year later. So it's very, very possible that the money system of a country can go to zero. And the reason it often does that is because there's wars to finance. So keep that in mind when you're starting to pay closer attention to the monetary system and what's really going on. So we had the Federal Reserve that was created back in 1913. It was a system backed by gold for quite a while. It was actually in 1971 that Nixon took us completely off the gold standard, and our money became totally a fiat currency. And then other countries around the world followed after that. So let's look at the track record of the Federal Reserve. So what happened since 1913? Well, we look and we see that in 1913, a dollar would buy a dollar's worth of stuff. But we find that by 2013, just a few years ago, that dollar would actually only buy 5 cents worth of stuff. Or what's another way to say this? A 95% devaluing of the purchasing power of the US dollar. Not a very good track record in my opinion. So what does that look like in our world? Well, what I would recommend to you is change the way you think about the information that you hear. And one of the things that we hear a lot about is what we call inflation. And inflation is something that the Federal Reserve actually wants. Our government actually wants that. And so inflation is something that we see. So what is inflation? Usually we think of inflation as prices are rising. And in this little illustration, we're saying, is the island rising? You know, we're paddling up to this island and we see that it's rising. Well, no, the island isn't rising. What's happening is the boat is sinking. Or another way to say it is our purchasing power of our money or our currency is weakening. It's buying less and less, and so the dollar is actually what's sinking when it comes to inflation. Our politicians and the Federal Reserve actually like that. That's a good thing, because as more and more debt is created, it means that it's easier to pay that off when we have inflation. So inflation is something that the Federal Reserve and our government actually wants. So I like to consider that a hidden tax, because as inflation goes on, we have to work harder and harder to be able to pay for the same goods and services. Now, just a few minutes ago, I showed you this gold coin that really doesn't mean anything to anybody, but how about this one? This is a Canadian maple leaf, and it is a 1 ounce piece of silver, and it is 0.999% pure, meaning it's essentially all 100%, well, 99.99% silver. And if I were to put this in your hand, there's very few people that would not automatically think there is some value here. This has value. You don't have to have a lot of education to know it does. But it has always been money for the last 5,000 years or more. So what does that mean to you and me? Well, what that means to me is that if the dollar is being debased, that its purchasing power is going down and down and down, and 95% of that purchasing power has been taken away since the Federal Reserve was organized. And by the way, in 1913, when the Federal Reserve was organized, so was the IRS, and taxation began. Which is a very interesting coincidence, right? Well, anyway, the point is, one of the things that we can do to not be the patsy in this game is to have some precious metals. Allow that to be something you have in order to create, I call it an insurance or a hedge against inflation and the poor monetary policies that we have seen over the years from the Fed and our federal government. So the big question becomes, okay, so I need gold and silver. What do I do next? Well, one thing that I would recommend to each one of you in getting started is first, get educated. You won't see what's coming if you don't understand what to look for. And there's some really good books out there that you might consider. One of them that I just love is called End the Fed by Ron Paul. Most people know of Ron Paul. He was a congressman, actually ran for president a couple of times. And anyway, he provides a really good understanding of what the Fed is and why we want to be very careful of that organization. Another one, and this book, The Conspiracy of the Rich, written by Robert Kiyosaki, was actually the book he wrote right after that event that I went to when I was just shocked at what the monetary system was all about. So that's a great one to understand the banking system and how you can, instead of be the patsy in the game, you can actually start winning at this game of monetary policy and money. Also, I would suggest to you, especially if you're interested in acquiring gold and silver, to consider the book, The Guide to Investing in Gold and Silver by Mike Maloney. This actually started out as a 900-page manuscript and was then boiled down to 250 pages, which means to me that the research was significant in that information. And he actually lays out the case very well from the beginning of our monetary history up to today. And then Jim Rickards, really anything he writes is excellent, and he wrote recently A New Case for Gold, and that's a good one to consider as well. Then another thing that I would do, the step 2, would be identify your position. And what I mean by that is figure out how much gold and silver you ought to have. There's a lot of different opinions regarding that, but it wouldn't be based on a dollar amount, because that's always changing. Gold is gold, silver is silver, an ounce is an ounce. It's an ounce today, it's an ounce in 10 years, 20 years, 100 years. But the value attributed to gold and silver is actually based on the currency of the day or the currency you're using. So gold and silver will always hold and retain their value, but the dollar is what has the problem when it comes to value. So anyway, identify your position. What do I mean by that? How many ounces? How many ounces of gold? How many ounces of silver? So you set a goal for the amount of ounces that you would have. And then you take that third step of acquiring physical precious metals. So a lot of you might be thinking, oh, yeah, like where am I going to come up with the money to do that? Well, actually, if money is the problem, then simply decide that you're going to start small. And this is where silver is a good opportunity, because anybody can buy a couple ounces of silver. It doesn't have to be gold. Gold and silver are both precious metals, both considered money. And so you can start small, and it's much better than not starting at all. And one of the things I found, and this is very interesting, is keep in mind, I started investing in gold and silver back in 2008. And I did my shopping around, and I actually ended up going with the author of the book, The Guide to Investing in Gold and Silver. It wasn't the cheapest, but the uh, what I needed to have done, he could do when it came to the acquisition. But the interesting thing is, as I've researched gold and silver over the years, so 9 years now, I recently found that there's the best source, the absolute best source I've found is a company called 7K Metals. And 7K Metals actually provides allows us the purchase of gold and silver at wholesale pricing, which is fantastic. I recently bought some more gold and silver. In fact, this was in that delivery, and it was less than a week from order to delivery, and that's pretty phenomenal if you start shopping around. So it's out there. The opportunity is great, and I hope that you'll start to consider getting educated in monetary policy so that you can no longer be the patsy at the table of monetary systems and policy, and actually start to thrive in that in understanding monetary policy and be on the benefiting side of that system. Thank you for your time, and I hope this information was valuable and helpful to you.